feel like they kind of, it feels like it's been a while since I've had any trouble like going on from Facebook.
Yeah, I think you're right.
I think they've kind of maybe hammered out some things.
All that time of being overloaded all the time, maybe they figured it out.
Yeah, maybe so. We've had more trouble lately streaming from for our congregation.
Hmm.
So
What's been the hang up for the issue?
I'm not sure exactly what's going on. Kind of letting the tech guys try to figure it out, but it keeps cutting out. Our video gets all messed up, and um, we had to switch. Well, we went away from like live streaming it publicly to just for our members. So we had to create like a new page, but it's not a public page, and I don't think Facebook gives as much like support to it or something. So
Could be.
yeah. Hey, good to see everyone this morning. Thanks for being here. Sorry for the now that Ben's juggling like 4 kids, there's it's a little bit more difficult for us
More
to
schedules.
match up our schedules all the time.
I forget about some of our scheduled doctor's appointments and stuff now.
Yeah. So it looks a little bit like things are lagging a little bit. I'm not sure if that's where you are or if that's me, but you keep freezing on my screen. So we'll see how it goes.
All right.
Hopefully it's no big deal. You have kind of that cool like vibe where you're like moving really slow.
Extremely laid back. Max laid back.
Yeah. Like the sloths on that one movie.
Right.
Flash, I'll call you Flash.
There we go.
All right, everyone. We are in Hebrews chapter 11, kind of finishing up that chapter. We were going to read verses 32 through, actually right through the chapter break into chapter 12, about verse 3. I think it's good to kind of keep that paragraph in chapter 12 with the thoughts that go back into chapter 10 and 11. I think I'm just going to jump into it. I mean, we've been in every one of these sessions, we've been focusing on what the text has to say about Jesus being superior to the things that tempt people to go back to their old ways of life. Once somebody's made the decision to follow Christ, there really isn't anything that could be better. And even if those things were what you did for all your life and ways that multitudes of people might try to seek to be close to God, there's just a lot. There's just a lot there that, sorry, my thing keeps saying, like, giving me trouble. I hope it's not me, and I apologize if it is. But here in chapter 11, we're reading about people that live their lives by faith and who needed to, really we're showing us what it looks like to not give up, to have endurance, to continue on the way that all these people are being encouraged to do with Christ. So,
Amen.
You want to add to that?
Not much. I mean, this whole thing is about, hey, who are you going to trust in? Are you going to trust in God and what he's done through Christ? Or are you going to keep trusting things out here in the world? And we got all these great models of people who figured out how to trust God in spite of really difficult circumstances. So it's been great.
Good. All right, let's read Hebrews 11, beginning in verse 32. And what more shall I say? For time will fail me if I tell of Gideon, Barak, Samson, Jephthah, David, and Samuel and the prophets, who by faith conquered kingdoms, performed acts of righteousness, obtained promises, shut the mouths of lions, quenched the power of fire, escaped the edge of the sword, from weakness were made strong, became mighty in war, put foreign armies to flight. Women received back their dead by resurrection, and others were tortured, not accepting their release, so that they might obtain a better resurrection. And others experienced mockings and scourgings, yes, also chains and imprisonment. They were stoned, they were sawn in two, they were tempted, they were put to death with the sword. They went about in sheepskins and goatskins, being destitute, afflicted, ill-treated, men of whom the world was not worthy, wandering in deserts and mountains and caves and holes in the ground. And all these, having gained approval through their faith, did not receive what was promised, because God had provided something better for us, so that apart from us, they would not be made perfect. Therefore, since we have so great a cloud of witnesses surrounding us, let us also lay aside every encumbrance and the sin which so easily entangles us, and let us run with endurance the race that is set before us, fixing our eyes on Jesus, the author and perfecter of faith, who for the joy set before him endured the cross, despising the shame, and is sat down at the right hand of the throne of God. For consider him who has endured such hostility by sinners against himself, so that you will not grow weary and lose heart.
The thing that I think is neat about this paragraph here at the end, which goes straight into the pointing to Jesus in chapter 12, is that it's easy, and I think in many ways very appropriate for us to be pretty impressed with all these different figures throughout the history of God's people. But he kind of does this machine gun montage here at the end of all these different, a lot of them nameless. I mean, some of them we can kind of pick out, oh, I'm pretty sure he's talking about this story or that story. Some of those stories that are in scripture, some of them seem to be stories maybe even from the history of Israel, even outside of scripture, perhaps. I think some of have suggested. So there's that. It's like, oh, it's not just that there's these all stars and then the rest of us are hanging around. It's no, actually, these people are just representative of anybody who's a person of faith. And let me just run through a bunch of nameless people or nameless deeds that nameless people did because of their faith. And so this is something that if we can share the faith of Abraham and Isaac and Jacob and Joseph and Moses and Rahab and Joshua and all the other people, it's this faith is the key, and most of all faith in God, which I think leads into the thing in chapter 12. All these people aren't really the thing. The real one we're fixing our eyes on and that we're trusting in is Jesus. And I love that makes a lot of the things in chapter 11 accessible for all of us. And it actually levels up the standard even more. Hey, you're not just trying to be like Abraham or Enoch or Sarah or whoever. You're trying to follow after Jesus. And all of us have the capability to do that. And all of us have the responsibility to do that. We can't just be like, well, that was Abraham, I can't really do that. Or that was Joshua, I can't do that. No, Jesus says, come on, come follow me. He's the one that's blazing the trail for us to follow. So this is a great encouragement, both in the sense of it's a comfort. Oh, okay, I may feel like a nobody in my little life of faith. That's fine. Like, there's bunches of people that are literally nameless here, and God saw them and what they did. On the other hand, I may not take it serious enough that I have to live by faith. No, Jesus came and died, and whatever your struggle is, it's not over yet. So you got to keep on fighting and keep on going. So I love the way he ends this chapter, kind of culminating all the things we've been talking about the past few weeks about living by faith.
Yeah. It reminds me of when, you're preaching a sermon or teaching a class and you look up at the clock and you're running out of time and you have so much more stuff to say. And you're just like, I don't have enough time, but here's like all the stuff I barf out, at the end. And, sometimes when you have those moments where you just sort of, there's value in, I think, slowing down and talking about things in a way, but there's great, I think Ed said it this way, a rhetorical reason to sometimes just like give all the evidence at once, like overwhelm, like with sort of almost the senses of how powerful a thing this is, yeah, Ed, I think your entire sermons are that, actually.
Ed would like that.
Yeah. Machine gun Eddie. Yeah. So, one of the things that stands out to me, though, in this flourish, in this kind of, list of things, is the highs and the lows of it. Like you've got some things that faith did that are extraordinary things. And wouldn't it have been amazing to be the person that got to conquer kingdoms, or obtain the promises or shut the mouths of lions, like all the things that are kind of like what movies are made of, like heroic, amazing, powerful things. But, one of the things we've been looking at through this whole text is that wasn't most people's experience with living
Mhm.
by faith.
Yeah.
Sure, there were those few who providentially got to be in the moment, like the victors. But for most of these people, they didn't obtain the promises,
Right.
even though it says that some did. For most of these people, they were the second half of the list. They were tortured. They were sawn in two. They lost their lives over this. Like, things never got better for them in their personal life, perhaps. In fact, they ended up losing everything because of their faith. So this isn't meant to be, hey, as long as you stick it out with faith in this particular life, everything's going to work out and grand things are going to happen. Maybe not, you know. In fact, when we read about Jesus, he's going to face the cross in the first couple of verses there. He endured the cross, and despised the shame because of the joy set before him. The joy may never come in our life when it comes to faith. So
Yeah.
we need to notice that in the list.
Yeah. Well, and actually, I think you see that in verse 32, where he lists off all these people. And on the one hand, to your point, I mean, David's a great example. Like David, you read the end of David's life, and I mean, he's able to look back and reflect on some great things. And of course, he prepared for the temple and the continuation of his kingdom and God's promises. But the end of David's story is he's an old man who can't even keep himself warm, that they have to hire out like a human electrical blanket. Like, that's pretty much where he's at the end of his life, I don't know. I don't know what to say, right?
I totally want to start a company now with electric blankets named Abishag. Like, that's what I want to do. Like,
I mean, I'm not trying to disrespect her. I think she's a great lady from what I can tell. But you know what I mean, right? Like, he's not some hero. It's not like his faith made him this heroic figure where his life just went like this. And some of that was because he didn't always live by faith. Some of that was just because he lived in the world. Same with some of these other guys. And so I think this, to your point, faith doesn't mean your life is just going to go great. I think it also means being a person who's walking by faith, living by faith. There's gonna be a lot of stains along the way. And I don't really know what to do in some respects with verse 32. Samson, for instance, being this, some of these people, it like makes sense. Samson's a tough one, except what I do think it shows is, one, the point is they did things by faith. So when you wonder, can I fill in the blank,
right,
resist temptation, stay, not go back to my old way of life, whatever the case may be, you can. Look at what God enabled all these people to do by faith. And I think maybe a secondary lesson here is God really looks to people who are living by faith, not just for people who have a spotless kind of record. I'm afraid that can be like, oh, God's cool with you committing a bunch of sins and being a bad person. I don't mean that at all.
Right.
But that is, I think, all these people's stories illustrates that. Very few of them are ones that have a spotless record, even within the scriptures of what we know about them. Most of them, we know some pretty bad stuff, but they were pursuing God by faith. They were seeking God by faith. And I think that makes it something that should motivate us to keep on going and not get discouraged, not lose heart, not drift back, either because of our circumstances or because of our own personal failures or shortcomings or whatever. Keep on living by faith regardless.
Right. That's right. Faith isn't for the flawless, Faith is for, if we're going to use preacher terms, like the floundering, like the failures, like everything about this list is almost troubling. It's like you kind of want to ask the writer, like, okay, so why, when you walk through the judges, why Gideon and Barak and Samson and Jephthah? Like, what about Deborah? And like, what about the ones that there's nothing bad to say about them except they just like went out and totally did the thing? Like, he almost specifically chooses the people who had moments of cowardice or, didn't really move as quickly as they should, or did some really foolish things or had some terrible character flaws, yet they endured and they trusted God. And the end result of all of it, is that they were people of whom the world was not worthy, like it says.
Which, by the way, what a great designation.
Yeah.
Because he could have said they were people that pleased God. That would be amazing. He could have said they were people of faith or people who overcame, which all that stuff's true. But I love that phrase and that idea, the world was not worthy, that if you live a life that's pleasing God, if you live a life by faith, you're going to actually feel the world is going to speak about you. And you may think of yourself as, I'm not worthy of the world. That's what I think these Hebrew people probably felt like in their community, among their Jewish brethren and family and friends. You're not worthy to be with us. Like, we're actually doing all these things and you've rejected that. You're following this Jesus of Nazareth character and doing all the things that these people of the way, whatever that is, are doing. Like, you're not worthy of being with us.
Right.
And actually here the Hebrew writer flips it on his head and says, no, like, I know you're going to be an outcast in the world. You're going to be in exile. You're going to not have received promises. You're going to be mistreated and tortured and overlooked and all that stuff. But actually it's the other way. You're pleasing to God. And the world that's rejecting God and being disobedient to God and rebelling against God, the world is not worthy to have you. And not in some kind of arrogance of ourselves, but it gives us a sense of how valuable we are to God and that we shouldn't feel anchored down in this world. Just like Abraham didn't feel like he belonged in the land where he was. He knew he was going to the city that had foundations. We've got to think of ourselves in the same way.
Yeah, that's great. That whole idea that God says the world's not, the world wasn't worthy of these people. Nearly every one of them, though, like you said, the world would have looked at them as worthless. Like, you're not worthy of being part of what we're doing in our culture, what we're doing in our country, what we're doing with like humanity. You guys who are living for this other place and this God we can't see, like, you're not worth anything to us. But scripture makes it clear that that's what sets the faithful apart. It reminds me of like what Peter wrote about when Jesus was rejected. He was rejected by his own people. He was thrown out, but he was precious in the sight of God. Yeah. And then later the women are told that, who are married to men who aren't believers, that even though they may not be accepted or thought well of by their unbelieving spouse, they are precious in the sight of God. Like, he measures worth far differently than the world does. But I'll tell you, that's so hard, like when it's real in your life, when you feel like the people you work with or the people in your neighborhood or the people in your family look at you and think less of you because of who you're living for and how you're living. Like, so many of us, we clamor so hard to try to make our Christianity and our faith seem relevant to people. We try to package it in all the ways to make the world admire it, instead of sort of just being about the business of being faithful to God.
Yeah.
And I think we need to be careful of that. I think I'm guilty of that. We're all guilty of that. We look at a world who finds Christianity distasteful and we try to season it up enough to make it palatable for people. And God just never, he does tell us to speak, with our speech seasoned with salt. I get that. But he doesn't ever talk to us about like trying to change our lives to, or to soften the things of faith to try to make it appear worthwhile to everybody else.
Yeah, that's right. It's just hard to pivot to caring most about verse 39 and 40, because verse 39 and 40 say these people, they were approved by God. Actually, that circles back to the very beginning, right? Like, I think it was the very first verse 2. By faith, the men of old, our fathers, our ancestors, won God's approval. And then here he comes back to that again. That's the thing, which I think is actually pretty telling, that he begins and ends this list of people of faith and deeds of faith, probably because he knows exactly what you're saying, that's our big temptation, our big challenge is seeking approval of people, seeking to be accepted. And that's not just the challenge for us in our day, but it was for them back then, and it will be for all Christians everywhere of all time. So much of like First Peter, for instance, what's the suffering they're dealing with? Most of it is that they're being mocked or ridiculed or ostracized socially. It's really hard to keep remembering, hey, I'm performing for an audience of one, and it's nobody who's on earth. It's only God. He's the only one I'm trying to seek the approval of, and that's it. And that's what drove Moses and Joshua and Abraham and Rahab and all these people that did all the stuff they did.
Absolutely. And kind of going back to like thinking of this through, loneliness and exile and shame are the hardest things to deal with, Yes. And I think when somebody who has never experienced that becomes a Christian, it becomes overwhelming. to look around and feel just so out of step and out of place and alone and weird, like just people thinking you're strange, like Peter would say in his letter. They're going to malign you and they're going to think you're crazy for living a different life. That's hard stuff. So I think it's good for us to take stock and ask, like, so if Christianity continues to be more and more unpopular, and our way of life and our way of thinking continues to be more and more scorned, although I think it always has been, maybe it's just in sharper focus lately, is it going to affect us, in negative ways, or is it going to be that we're going to find some comfort in this? This verse 38, when it talks about them wandering in deserts and mountains and caves and holes in the ground, doesn't that sound like when terrorists go hide, like from, like we think about the Middle East and we think about somebody who's done something and the government says, well, we can't find them because they're out there somewhere in the wilderness living in a cave. Isn't that the idea, though, that at times Christians had to, or faithful people had to flee to places to just stay alive in this world that didn't want them? When I traveled in Israel a few years ago, we visited down by the Dead Sea to some areas that, have been a little bit uncovered through time and excavation and stuff. And some of it was places they said like might have been the remnants of places like Sodom and Gomorrah and all of that probably were under the Dead Sea. But there were other, you could tell there were other people that had lived down there in the middle of nowhere. Anyway, there was this one particular cave we went into where they showed us like how they've uncovered some of it. And it was just a one room, like carved out, like little room that somebody obviously had lived in, like in a long time ago. And we got to looking around the cave, and inside the cave, there were markings and writings that were obviously Christian. They were obviously Christian writings. And so we got to talking about it with the guide and all of that. And the theory is that when Jerusalem was destroyed in AD 70, and when persecution was really strong and all of that, and Christians just fled from maybe the persecution of Saul or, the destruction of Jerusalem, and Christians just were scattered. Many of them had no place to go. And they went to places like this and literally just lived in caves. When I saw that, though, I thought of this verse because this was being written before that would have happened, right. Like getting this in their head that some people are going to have to live in caves and holes in the ground. Like these Christians are maybe going to have to do that, the very people that read this letter.
Yeah. And I mean, so much of this, to your point, he's kind of curated all these different acts of faith on purpose. I mean, we even talked about some of the individuals. Why would you pick out the thing you picked out about Joseph? Of all the things Joseph did, why pick out the thing you did? Why pick out these stories and stuff? And so much of it, I think, is exactly what you're pointing out, that he curated these stories throughout time to say, hey, actually, I'm telling you this because I know you guys either are experiencing this stuff or you soon will be experiencing these same things. And the Spirit was preparing people for that, and that carries on throughout time. But I love that in the end of verse 40 kind of caps that off, that, okay, it's not just cool. Those people did a bunch of amazing things and I'm impressed with them. Right. Like you read stories about people in different wars or whatever, and you're just amazed by them, but it doesn't necessarily move you to anything. You're just impressed with them. These stories aren't just meant to impress us. They're meant to move us to something. And I think that's part of the meaning, at least. I don't know what you think about it. There's probably more to it, at least. But at the end of verse 40, so that they would not be made perfect or complete or whole without us, apart from us. In other words, I think he's saying, hey, there's this legacy of faith and being loyal to God and trusting in God and not shrinking back to destruction, but enduring to the preserving of your soul. And it's not like the story's already been written and it's over. God is still working in history. He's been working through Jesus, and he's working in your life. And actually, God doesn't intend for the list to end until it's all over. And there needs to be a longer list. And each one of us who are following after Jesus, we need to consider ourselves of taking up that mantle, to be willing to, and to go out by faith, just like Abraham and Sarah and Joseph and Rahab and all these people throughout history, just like those people living in caves. It's the story's not complete yet. There's this chunk of still the followers of Jesus fitting into, and each one of us taking our part in the procession of faith throughout history. And so the question is, are we going to grab onto that? Are we going to walk by faith just like these other people did, as God completes the picture of all the faithful people?
Yeah, that's really good. Kind of reminds me actually of the way Jesus talked when he first started preaching in the Sermon on the Mount. And he said, blessed are you when you're persecuted for righteousness' sake. Like when you live your life faithfully and you kind of join this procession and story of how the greatest people who've ever lived on earth were generally mistreated and ignored and shamed because of their faith. And Jesus says, blessed are you because they persecuted the prophets who were before you. And then we're going to watch Jesus go through the same thing. And Jesus is going to say, blessed are you because you're sharing in my sufferings. Like this is the story of the island of misfits. This is the story of the non-glamorous people who live on planet Earth, who are the meek and the lowly, but hopefully live their life in front of the darkness, being the light of the world and being the salt of the earth, and being joyful and not grumbling and complaining about their lot in life, holding fast the word of life that other people can see it. Like there's this dynamic of us just coming to terms with this, if this is our lot, and knowing that we're here for a great purpose, to be a witness and part of the story, to draw people to Christ, where they're going to endure suffering and shame, but find the joy that's set before them.
Yeah. And it seems that, as he transitions at the beginning of 12 to focusing particularly on Jesus, the way he describes all these stories that we've been talking about, that we've been looking at the past few weeks, and that he, briefly covers here in chapter 11, he calls them witnesses, which is a really interesting way to talk. And I think the point of that is, he says, look, I know living by faith is a dangerous proposition. I know a lot of times it actually looks like it's not really working out, and that it may not work out. And that the people that you've even seen it doesn't seem, but I'm holding all these people up to you as evidence that it will. Not in this life. After all, the world's not worthy of those who live by faith and are approved by God. But what I'm telling you is all these people are witnesses. Each one of them is taking the witness stand, telling their story. And when we read their stories throughout Scripture, they're testifying that God is worthy of being trusted, that he is a rewarder of those who diligently seek him. And he is pleased and approves of those who chase after him and remain loyal and true to him. All these people are witnesses to that. And then actually there's the great witness, Jesus, really the one who really takes the witness stand to prove this to us. He's the last one who's proven more than anybody else that being faithful to God is the path to life. And yeah, it's also going to include a lot of sufferings and a lot of pain, a lot of difficulty, but there's joy that's set out before you if you'll live by faith. And Jesus has blazed the trail. He's the author and the perfecter of faith. You got to trust him. You got to look to him as the culmination of all these other lesser witnesses, that God is worthy of your trust, that God is worthy of your whole life, no matter what it costs in the world. It'll pay off in the end. Don't give up, no matter what your sufferings are. Look to these witnesses, look to the truth that they testify about, and keep living by faith.
Yeah, very good. We're pretty much out of time. And I know that in the next session, we'll focus more on chapter 12, verses 1-3. Yeah. But the one thing I might want to grab from that, just to finish this discussion from the end of chapter 11, is that one little phrase that has always been kind of enigmatic to me in verse 2, when it says that he despised the shame, or despising the shame of the cross. And if I understand that right, it doesn't mean that he hated the fact that he was being shamed. We sometimes use the word despise like that.
Right.
That literally the idea of despising the shame is something like think nothing of. Yeah. Or despising. If I despise somebody, I just think nothing of them. They don't mean anything to me. I think part of what's being said here is endurance for Christ and endurance for anyone that's going through difficulty is to not think so much about the shame of it,
Yep.
caring how we look to everybody else, people heaping abuse on. You guys are a bunch of weirdos for thinking and believing the way that you do. The only way somebody's going to endure, the only way these Hebrew people were going to endure staying with Christ is no matter what was said about them or the way people pointed and laughed or, you know, the intellectual sort of slander that they received. They shrugged it off and thought, well, I'm not going to think much about this shame because I know the joy set before me and I'm going to eventually be there. So say what you want. I'm moving forward, and that's tough.
Yeah. Yeah. That's good stuff. Thanks everybody. This was fun as always. Missed y'all last week, but glad we could get back on today, get back at it.
Yep. All right. We'll try to be on next week.
Yeah.